So thank you so much for being here and for being part of Map the System. This is going to be our final workshop. I can't believe how fast the competition has gone, but we've loved seeing all of your engagement and motivation and attendance at our office hours and the various workshops. So let's make this a really good final workshop. So today I'm very glad to be joined by Darshan, who is one of our close colleagues and affiliates at the Skoll Centre, and he has been heavily involved in our MBA programme GoTo, which is kind of the sister programme to Map the System here at Oxford. So Darshan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Darshan Sanghrajka. As Alice said, I'm a Knowledge Equity Fellow at the Skoll Centre, and I'm founder of Super Being Labs. And at Super Being Labs, we work on 3 parts of the system: youth, knowledge and culture, and see how they all work together to improve society so that people don't have barriers to thriving. And I've got some facilitators here today, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But Henry, Tanya, Catalina, and Alice. Alice has just spoken. So, and just before they do that, just the purpose of today's workshop is you've obviously been mapping the system, you've been doing your research, you're now at a point where you're looking at interventions. It's to try and give you some pointers on how to ensure that your interventions are systemic and not essentially just ideas that are innovative in their thinking, but actually won't end up creating systems change. And we have a plan for the workshop, but please feel free to jump in, ask questions, put your hand up if you have a question, and then we'll do a little exercise in breakout rooms so that you can explore your work from a different perspective. I'll let Tanya, Catalina, Henry introduce themselves, and Alice.
Thank you so much. So I think that you all know who I am. You've all been bugged by me on emails many times, but I'm Alice Luca, and I'm the program manager for that system. Oh, sorry, we had a bit of background noise there. And Catalina, can we hear from you?
Hello, I'm Catalina Serrano. I'm working also in the Skoll Centre. I'm an MBA from Oxford from last year, and I'm happy to be here with you, all of you, and meet you again.
Thank you so much. Great.
I think Henry's here as well.
Yeah, Henry's just turned up at the moment of time. Henry, happy to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Henry. I'm thrilled to be here, one of the tutors on Map the System, former neurologist, now working in mental health and wellbeing, and an associate fellow at the visiting fellow at the Skoll Centre. Great to be here. Nice to see some familiar faces.
Nice to see you, Henry. Tanya?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Collavo, also a tutor on this program, and I've been tutoring the sister program, the GoTo program in Oxford, for the past 4 years. So I kind of have the double perspective of now these 2 different but strongly related initiatives. And in my main time, I research social entrepreneurship and I teach sustainable business at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. So I'm kind of the odd one out here, not officially affiliated to Oxford anymore, but I've been for several years. So yeah, kind of still part of the team, nicely enough.
Thanks so much, Tanya. And yeah, we're delighted to have you and Henry and the other tutors on board this year. I know many of the students here have already spoken to the team and really benefited from that support. So thank you. Great. So before we hear from Darshan, which is going to be the exciting part of the workshop, I just wanted to make it super clear, like which part of the project that we're talking about. So some of you will be familiar with this visual. This is from the project evaluation criteria. And if you think of each of these bullet points as something that the judges at your local institution will be grading you against, and each is worth 5 points. So the top part is the solutions landscape. So the interventions really tends to come after that. So we'll touch a little bit on the solutions landscape. Some of you may have started that already. That's looking at existing solutions in the system, who has tried to solve this problem, what has worked, what hasn't worked, looking at different contexts. And then moving on to levers of change, also known as leverage points, and then making a recommendation for an intervention. So that's really why we're here today. That's actually a new element to the project this year. Some of you might have taken part in Map System last year, but it was a new requirement that you actually have to make a recommendation. And the main reason for adding that into the project is to make sure that we're thinking of what would we do after Map the System. You know, it's an amazing chance to learn about systems thinking, to map a problem you already care about, but really our goal is that you ideally could take forward your work into a new venture, or make recommendations where other people could carry forward this work. So I'm happy to answer any further questions at the end of the workshop about this. We are going to hang on at the end of the workshop, 7 p.m. UK time. If anyone's got any questions, and Darshan's going to hang back too. So feel free to ask any kind of specific questions about your project then. Thanks so much.
Someone from a different background. That's not to say that you pick the person you like to decide.
So if we can just mute ourselves, and if you have any questions for us, just put your hand up and I'll bring you in to ask a question. Thank you. So here's the layout for the evening. Done the welcome and intro, so tick. I'm going to do a little session on just giving you tips and advice on your systems interventions. Then we're going to do a breakout rooms activity. You're going to play it back very, very quickly. I'll summarize, and then Alice and Catalina will close. But as Alice said, we'll stay behind for further Q&As to help afterwards when this finishes. So yeah, let's get started. So just for context, as I said, I'm a knowledge equity fellow at SCOL, but I'm also the track lead for the social reset track on Oxford's GoTo program. And so in many ways, that program actually looks at the systems mapping, but also the intervention. So there is a bit of synergy here. And so what I wanted to do was just do a quick recap of some key points to help you really reflect, and because these things can get forgotten at this stage when you've been mapping the system and you're trying to, see the wood for the trees and understand how entrenched everything is. So just to begin, I've often seen students sort of fall in love with the problem as if it's like a thing that exists. Just try to think of your problems not as problems, but outcomes of a network of many interconnected levers, and that is the system. The system's outputs lead to these outcomes that you call problems. And when you start seeing it as that, you start realizing that actually the system's doing exactly what it's designed to do for those that it benefits. So really think about who has the power and who has no or very little agency in that dynamic. And the reason I say this is because if you start looking at it this way, and you probably already have, but it's just remember to remind yourself to do so, you will stop sort of short-circuiting your brain to looking for a solution that's isolated from the mapping that you've done. It can often be easy to look at a map and go, do you know what? Because of my assumptions and my biases, it's so obvious, here's the solution. And it just doesn't work like that. And you just have to prevent yourself from falling into that trap by remembering that the thing that you've observed is happening because the system's outputs are leading to those outcomes. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Alice, I'll let you just check if anyone's putting hands up or whatever. And then once you've done that, it's really, really important that you look at it from multiple perspectives. And what do I mean by this? Often I've seen people kind of look at the problem and, thanks, Henry. It's quite hard to do this on Zoom because I can't see any visual feedback because I can just see the screen. So yeah, do feel free to put stuff in the chat so I can read it as you're going. And if it's nice, put it in caps as well so I can see it quicker. But when you're looking at the system, when I say multiple perspectives and parking assumptions, the reason I say that is about this concept of knowledge equity. It's crucial to understanding a system, and crucially the mental models that enable it to work and persist. You know, often you will kind of think, do you know what, I've spoken to, you know, this person and this person, this person. So I'll give you an example. A team that was working on the problem of small-scale farmers in a specific country who were looking at cashew production. And what they were trying to do is understand why so much value is being left on the table by that country when they are the third largest producers of raw cashew nuts. The people they spoke to when they mapped the system were all the people that benefit from the current system. The people that they couldn't get hold of or didn't delve deep enough into are the people that actually produce the cashews, the farmers and the processors that they want to inspire to keep this value in the country. They didn't speak to those people, so actually their entire assumptions were then basically reinforced by this knowledge that was lopsided. And so it's really, really important that when you look at the system and you go, right, there is a powerful outcome here, but that powerful outcome is actually creating injustice for certain people. Talk to those people. It's really, really important that you listen to them and understand from their perspective what's going on. Another example right now is with Ukraine, you're seeing umpteen people put up websites where it's matching people with spare rooms with refugees. Now that's all, you know, really well-intentioned, etc. But actually in practice, it doesn't work. None of those people have spoken to refugees. None of those people have spoken to people that help refugees. And none of those people have looked at the power imbalance that people fleeing from war zones have when a system is stacked against them. There is no way of fleeing quickly and safely. There's very little safe passage. The system currently expects you to upload documentation that you no longer have. In some cases, the system's documentation is also biased in many, many ways. So for example, the UK government's paperwork, has changed now, but last week specifically had a question that says, does your husband allow you to leave the country? Paraphrase, but essentially, why was that in there? So it's really, really important that you seek out multiple perspectives from the people that don't have the power in the system. So in this cartoon, it's these 3 round balls. No one's talking to them. Currently, the entire education system is the people talking to them are the guy with the little black tie and more people like him. And you just get this persistent outcome from a system that's designed to do what it's designed to do. And now that sounds obvious, but just look at your mapping and go, have I spoken to enough people that are facing the injustice that the system's creating? Does that make sense? And when you do speak to them and you do listen to them, then it's really, really important that you don't just take their ideas and repurpose them in a way that makes you look great. The idea about knowledge equity is to respect those insights and literally live in that equity, to sort of say, do you know what, this is happening, this is coming from this person, and it was their idea. But those people will know best of how to deal with stuff. So another example, Sean, hold on, let me just read your thing. Don't you think it's equally important to talk to the beneficiaries as well? It helps to understand how the system gets shaped in a certain way. We might also have a conformity bias while talking to the people from whom we believe to be on the receiving end. Sean, yeah, absolutely. And that's the multiple perspectives. So it's talking to both, but not forgetting to talk, because a lot of people forget to talk to the people that face the injustice, and they talk to the beneficiaries to try and understand the system. But when you're talking to the beneficiaries, all you're getting is the system benefits me, and this is why it does so. So that's not balanced. And a lot of ideas then fall on top of that. So, you know, it's the same with Airbnb currently opening up its platform to people to kind of rent out their homes to refugees for free. Again, no one's talked to the refugees who have to deal with this system on the ground while they're running at all. They've talked to the people that own the homes that have a bedroom. What does that interview look like? Well, I have a room, I have a heart, and I want to give it for free. That's great. That benefits you even more. But actually, how does someone who's a mother with 3 children run across to the UK with or anywhere else under the knowledge that you're safe, that your environment's good for them while they've got trauma, that they can actually live with you and rebuild their lives to a certain extent before they go back home? All of those things haven't been talked about. So it's really important you do talk to the beneficiaries, but not just the beneficiaries. Sean, does that answer your question?
Yes, surely. Thank you.
Cool. Esteban says, what about the conflicted views on the outcomes of the network of so many interconnected levers? So it's good you talked about conflicted views. When you're researching, it's about respecting the views. And of course, there's going to be conflicting viewpoints. You know, you're always going to see that, but that's what you expect, right? Because it's all about multiple perspectives. It's about finding, you know, sometimes people talk about systems change as a win-win. It's not a win-win. If it's going to work, someone's going to have to yield some power. So when you think about conflicting perspectives, it's keeping it within the context of that some people are going to have a viewpoint that's really, really rigid, but it's because either they're scared about losing something or they're benefiting from it and they don't want it to change. So what does that look like? Another example of this is, let's take the school system. In the UK, for example, one of the biggest persistent problems is certain academy chains off-roll people. And off-rolling in the UK is essentially, you're not expelling them or suspending them, you're literally telling them to leave your school. And so certain league tables look great because those schools have off-rolled kids. Black kids are disproportionately off-rolled. Those kids then are out of the system. So you interview that head teacher and what do they say? They say, do you know what? That kid just wasn't prospering at this school and it wasn't great for them. We felt like somewhere else would be better for them. That's one viewpoint. You talk to that same kid and they say, I don't know why I was told to leave. I was trying my best, but I was put in the bottom set, so I couldn't perform properly. I was already told I was an idiot, all this kind of stuff. So you now got another viewpoint. Now, those are 2 conflicting viewpoints, right? But who's benefiting from this situation here? So you need to think about it in that context. You need to really understand that. And then interview more people, talk to more people. You know, if you've got, you know, 10 kids telling you one thing and a teacher telling you another, who do you listen to? Both, but actually you give more weight to the person that's actually losing their sense of agency in this power dynamic. Esteban, does that help make sense with that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Great.
No problem. And then that leads to this thing of like, you know, your problem does have multiple root causes, no single owner. So if your intervention is tackling the symptoms, it probably believes there is a single owner. It needs to be tackling the root causes. So in this case, it will be, do you know what? We really think there should be a program for kids who are off-rolled from academy chains in the UK. That's tackling the symptoms and that's not going to solve anything systemically. If anything, it's going to create a pathway to make things worse. And so, you know, in that thing, you've mapped the system and you've gone, right, how do we give back power to this kid that's been off-rolled? Well, do you know what? We're going to build this program for them that's going to give them the power back, and then they're going to go to the best university in the country. They're going to get the best job ever. It doesn't work like that, right? They are a kid who's living through trauma. They've been persistently told they're not smart. They have parents that they now have to answer to. They have been let out of a system. Once they've been let out of the system that they live within then attaches a label to them, which is they're not in education. They're not in training. So what's called a NEET in this country. They're not in education, employment, or training. So they're just stuck there. Next time they go for a job, the teachers will say, what school were you at? Well, for the last year, I wasn't. Why were you not at school? I was off-rolled. What does off-rolling mean? I've never heard of that before. you see how this kid's having to persistently justify their existence of why things have happened to them, while the school on the other side is getting a really good rating on how great they are. So a systemic change there would look at the root causes, which is what's causing the schools to off-roll kids in the first place, and what's causing the schools to off-roll specific types of kids. What's the biases involved there? How do you mitigate against that and create the conditions that schools don't even think about off-rolling anyone? What does that look like? Does that make sense? Cool. Do you think it's important to highlight the journey? I mean, describing something like we started here, but we discover this. Yeah, definitely it's important to describe the journey, because not even for anyone else, but for yourself, you need to understand the systems map, just not as a arbitrary thing on a piece of paper, because we've all seen systems maps where if someone random looked at it, you're like, I don't know what's going on here. So it is important to describe the journey, and I believe stories are really important, because through stories you can understand the human root causes behind that entire system map, because at the end of the day, it's humans that benefit, it's humans that suffer, it's humans that can make things better, and it's humans that can make things worse. So those stories are really important. And then, these golden sort of interventions where it's kind of like, this is how we're going to tackle, we're going to create a shift by pulling on this lever, and we're going to create a shift by pulling on this lever, and we pull on 3 of them, and suddenly the whole system map looks different. It's really important to understand that change takes constant evolution, right? It needs sense making, needs leadership, needs collaboration, and those mental models enable systems to persist. So if you think about, racial justice, you think about financial justice, financial change, etc., all of that stuff requires a long-term framework that builds momentum towards the change, the outcome that you're looking to create. It's not about just pulling on a few levers and then expecting things to change overnight, because guess what? There's going to be a resistance to them, and people will pull away. And that becomes a point where you end up with quite fly-by-night interventions in which kind of feels like systems thinking, but actually never yield any change in the long run. And those mental models are really important to examine, because they're the things that enable the systems to persist. It's when humans don't communicate with each other, when humans have biases and assumptions about each other. It's about when someone thinks X is the truth and someone else thinks Y is the truth. And the person who thinks Y is the truth is the one actually experiencing that injustice or not benefiting from the system, is the person no one wants to listen to. So how does that ever change, right? If we go back to the example of Ukraine, we've had a refugee crisis across multiple countries for a long time now. But with Ukraine, it seems like there's a mental model shift where people are paying attention more for whatever reason. They're paying attention more. And there is a chance right now for true leaders to jump on that and shift the entire thinking behind what a refugee is. The last time that kind of shift happened, and it didn't even happen properly, was World War II. But we've got a chance right now, for whatever reason it is, whether it's racial injustice, etc., there is a chance right now where a vast number of the world believe that people fleeing from the war need safe passage, and they need safety and dwelling and a sense of belonging. This is the time now where your solution is not a website with a brokerage for rooms versus spare rooms versus people that need it. It's actually deeper than that. It's about creating frameworks and mental model shifts that get people to understand what it is to be a refugee, what it's like, what they have to put up with, what the systems puts in their way, why we have these things. A good example of this is in this country, once you shift from being an asylum seeker to getting your status as a refugee, you have 28 days to get your housing, your bank account sorted, your job, etc. In those 28 days, if you don't do it within those 28 days, the government, you will have lost all government support. So in those 28 days, if you haven't got all that stuff sorted, you've got no one helping you. Now, no amount of free Airbnbs, etc., is going to fix that. That requires a massive shift in people's understanding of what it is to be a refugee and what people have to put up with, and the lack of dignity in that space. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Next slide, Alice. So just, it's really important that you check whether you're focusing on the complex problem or focusing on tackling the enabling conditions that enable it to persist. If it's the latter, you're onto something. But if you're just focusing on the problem, i.e. that kid that's been off-road, rather than why they've been off-road, I know that sounds simplistic and obvious, but it's really important to test your thinking here when you're doing your intervention. Which one is it? Are you focusing on the complex problem or the enabling conditions behind it? And as I said, how much work have you put into understanding the mental models that create the outputs that lead to your problematic outcome? Another example of this is people think that it's easy to buy a home these days. Who are those people? Those are people from a previous generation where it was easy to buy a home, relatively speaking, because wage growth was in line with you know, how much you needed to borrow to buy a home. That's no longer the case. There are also other factors involved, which is younger people are renting for longer, so they actually don't have the savings available for the deposit in the first place. Again, the older mental model is, well, you should have just not eaten that avocado on toast, as we keep saying in papers, etc. But actually, no amount of avocado on toast is going to pay for your deposit for a house in a lot of countries right now. Another example is when people think their stocks are going up, as they did in 2020 and 2021, they feel very much like, do you know what? The pandemic's not so bad. We're making a lot of easy money. What they don't understand is when central banks pump liquidity into the system at the rate they did, that is going to lead to repercussions. And we're seeing that now. You know, inflation's being blamed on the war and things like that. But actually, it's, if you track the amount of money that central banks put in versus the growth in stocks and shares and every other asset, you'll see a correlation. And then now that the central banks are pulling that money out, you'll see the repercussions at the worst time possible, because now inflation is running hot. But the mental model there is, as long as my stock portfolio is going up, I'm becoming richer. There's no real thought about the repercussions of why that's happening and who that's benefiting. And then you think about the knock-on effects to then how things are interconnected, is the way, for example, the press talks about stuff. So, you know, how many times last year did we hear that Elon Musk is the richest man in the world now? How many times did we hear that he lost this much money today and he made this much money today? Guess what? Neither of those are true. We, the people that understand finance, know that his net worth increased because his stock price increased. His stock price increased because the Fed was pumping liquidity into the system. That was then causing people to gamble with that liquidity. That was then causing more companies to borrow that free money pretty much and buy back stocks and shares, which was then lifting prices up again. So actually what the press should have been doing is shifting away from this headline-based output and to a more knowledge-based output of educating people to understand how this was creating a massive underlying problem that would lead to issues down the line, which is what we're seeing now. Does that make sense? And then have you worked on building trust between those your intervention gives more power to and those you'll take it away from? Because that's really important as well, because an example of this is there is plenty of research done on political cycles. So as soon as something shifts to the left or the center left, there is a period of time where it will shift back to the right, center right, to far right when people have had enough. So for example, President Obama's 2 presidencies led to a huge growth in the number of far-right groups proliferating in the US. It wasn't just about his president, it was actually, we don't want that ever to happen again. And now you're seeing the repercussions of that in a very divided USA, where you're literally seeing violent rhetoric in the corridors of power and no one knows how to deal with this. So if there is an intervention, which is we're going to do X and it's going to be progressive, you need to make sure that your intervention also looks at the people that it's taking perceived power away from, and making sure you're building a bridge of trust there so that they don't feel like they have to be reactive to that new change. And over time, anything you've come up with that sounds really smart right now doesn't stand the test of time, you know? And that's really important. So a good example of this is gun violence, right? So, you know, it's not, people don't have a problem with background checks. What they're worried about is if you yield your guns, what's next? What are you going to yield next? And no one's really done the leadership to try and explain there is no next. There is no, we're not coming for your homes. It's actually to protect you, but there's no thinking about it. So one of the things that Obama was looking at the time was actually not shifting the rhetoric from gun control to how can you have your gun and we can make it safer. You see how that's a shift? That's bridging the thing. Of course, it's a democracy, so he couldn't have had more than his 8 years. But if he had, that's the shift that was happening in the conversation. So look at that. I hope that all kind of makes sense. I know I've gone over time, but I hope that kind of helps you have some sort of framework to looking at your interventions so that, I mean, there's loads more there, but those are the key things that I feel will allow you to be creative, but also be respectful to the people you're trying to help, but, and end up with a real systemic change and not just an idea or 10. So, yeah. So I think the next thing is, so, sorry, Alice, if you just flip back one more slide, I forgot real quick. I was like, where's the slide gone? With that, there's just two things. There's a podcast called Nice White Parents, which I'd encourage you to listen to. You don't have to agree or disagree with it. It's more to try and understand from the perspective of the journalist who had embedded herself in the school in New York to look at why education can't be equitable, what was causing it. I won't spoil the punchline to the podcast, but as you watch it, you'll see they actually get to the point through multiple conflicting views coming together, working together, and enabling that change to happen. And the best bit about it is that it actually looks at kind of the 60-year-old relationship between white parents and the public school down the block, and shows the unintended consequences that can happen to education when well-meaning people end up causing kind of knock-on effects to something that could have worked but didn't because they were well-meaning. Just listen, it's only 5 episodes, but I'd encourage you to watch it. The other thing is Scotland's Violence Reduction Unit, which is actually based off a program in Boston in the 90s. But in Scotland, they had a massive kind of knife crime epidemic, etc. And they managed to kind of drop their murder rate by 35%. And one of the and assault as well. One of the things that they did was they looked at knife crime and violence as a public health issue, not a policing issue. And their tagline was "Violence is preventable, not inevitable." And so what they did was, instead of penalizing young kids, Alice can send round the links to both those things after this. But yeah, instead of penalizing young kids, what they did was they kind of made a map of all the kids in certain areas that were constantly getting in trouble, that were skipping school, playing truant, etc. And beyond it, they actually then created a collaborative movement with teachers, police officers, doctors, mental health practitioners, youth workers, etc. And what they did was, anytime a kid got into trouble, instead of arresting them, they sat down and through those conduits started talking to them. So multiple facets were looking at it and going, right, you're a kid who's got a mental health condition, you're a kid who's not eating at home, you're a kid who's has a parent in prison, you're a kid who's been attacked before, you're a kid that's been let down by the police. And so as they did that, it ended up creating this model where, because it was a public health issue, it looked to these kids from a public health perspective. So it was like, not you're in trouble, but why are you in trouble and how can we stop that happening again? And that system around them meant that kids weren't suddenly being criminalized even more. And that criminalization then wasn't then leading to what we know, unemployment, long-term unemployment, criminal sentences that then affect things like your credit rating and so on, and your prospects. And so Scotland were able to, change that. And London is now looking into how to do this. They're starting to do it a bit more, but the pandemic got in the way. So I hope those two case studies, I think just look at them, because neither of them have a fancy, here's a tech solution, or here's a kind of lever we can pull. It's actually a lot of exploratory work that led to these new systems being built around these problems. And both of them have found a solution that's persisting in a good way. So I hope that helps. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we'll do a quick exercise now. So we've got, I talked for too long, so let's do 10 minutes, I guess. But yeah, what I want you to do is you've done your systems mapping, or you're getting there. I want you to just move away from, your intervention ideas in practice, but keep them in your head, in your breakout rooms. And instead of thinking about the idea themselves, I want you to explore the mindset shifts that are needed to drive acceptance of those ideas. And I really want you to do that, because I want you to see how much work is needed for this to work, what human elements you need to have in place for this to work. And by doing this, you're going to make your idea either more resilient, or you're going to really critically examine your idea to be like, is this a logically nice thing? I have a theory of change, it should work. Or is this something that actually isn't going to work at all? Does everyone understand the exercise?
Hi.
Everyone, how'd you find it? How did you find that? Is it tough? Yes, good. It's meant to be tough. It's the thing that I find people just forget to always look at. In this quest to get to an idea, you're forgetting the human element of this. So I don't know if any groups want to play back an epiphany or a thought or something that's helped them think about their systems map in a different way. If anyone wants to be brave and volunteer yourselves. Innocent?
I think I had the benefit of hearing you as you were advising one of the team members. I'm not sure, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I remember you were advising a particular lady who was speaking about the issue of waste management and people benefiting from the waste management, and they're making so much money from it, and the system is opaque. So whatever system intervention that they want to bring across the board is essentially saying that they're going to cause someone to lose 20 million. So how do they get people to move in their mental models so that they might want to actually become a part of the change they want to see happening? And the epiphany that came to me is because we have a similar challenge that we're tackling as a group. We're tackling the issue of illegal small-scale mining. And it so happens that when you start looking at this issue, you see it because of its multiple effects that it has in the Ghanaian country. You might see environmental damages. You might see due to some things like mercury, which is used in small-scale illegal mining. You might see a lot of environmental degradation. And it's so easy at that point in time to say, hey, there's something bad about the system. But when you dig deeper, you realize that there's so many people that are actually benefiting from the value chain of small-scale illegal mining. And so the bigger question becomes, who are these people that are mainly benefiting from the thriving activity of small-scale mining? And if they are actually benefiting from that, how is it possible for us to engage them in such a way that they'll be able to change their mental models to become a part of the systemic change that we want to see? So I think that was like the major insight that I got to kind of think about all the major stakeholders that might be affected by any change within the system that we might want to push across the board.
Cool. Thanks, Innocent. I'm looking forward to seeing your final submission on that. I'm intrigued. Anyone else want to be brave and push themselves forward? I can't see everyone, so.
Veronica?
Hi everyone. I'm with Esteban. We are talking about the Nile River, and everything you thought I was how to connect with this case, because we are analyzing the stakeholders deal with this negotiation. But it's interesting because in this case we have a long-term Egyptians take control of the river, but now with the dam, there was a change in the status quo. Now they do not have more the power they have for a long time, long years, but they are fighting a lot to achieve a deal in order to be beneficial for this country, such as the river. So it's really a challenge for us, like look for this, because now we already have a big change in the system, but we are trying to, they are trying to, how to bring them together to look for the river as a whole, to bring benefits for all of them instead of conflicts or things like that. Yeah, this is a real challenge for us, but really interesting.
Great, thank you. All right, anyone else? Just on that note, Veronica, one of the things to remember is with those kind of things, for some people, it's really hard to visualize the benefit of the preservation of nature, because it's not something you can cost up easily and mentally straight away, right? So it's kind of like, I get this money right now, or I can believe in your maths, which says I get this in the long run. I don't believe in your maths. So this is back to this thing of like, how do you create leadership that allows them to believe in your narrative? It's not gonna, if you're speaking to someone directly, they're not gonna believe you unless you build up a bond. But who else will they listen to? There has to be someone they're gonna listen to more than they're gonna listen to you. How do you bring them into the equation? You know, it's really, really important that you think about those things. Because sometimes when I've seen with these sort of things, people try and create this systemic change and they sort of say, hey, we're going to have this comms program and it's going to change people's hearts and minds. And you're like, well, who's delivering it? Oh, we're going to, like, it's going to be nationwide. Yeah, but where's it coming from? And you know, we live in a world where upside down is downside up, kind of people now, there is no truth. Like, there is no concept of truth. You can literally say, you know, this happened, and then someone will say it didn't, but you can show them a video of it happening and they'll say, I don't see that. In that environment, a comms challenge or any kind of narrative that doesn't lean upon someone that person's going to trust and listen to is not going to work. You know, if you think about all of the kind of human rights activists in the world that have succeeded, notice they haven't succeeded by creating a narrative of us versus them. They've done it very smartly by building a narrative of us, all of us, right? If you think about Mandela, one of the biggest fears that the incumbent government had then was that if they released Mandela and they gave Black people power, Black people would seek revenge. It required Mandela's leadership to explain that wouldn't happen. They had to have faith. But why would they listen to Mandela? Because Mandela was a leader and he was someone that both sides could listen to and have some sort of respect for. But when he was younger, they wouldn't have listened to him, right? It took that many years of being in prison for people to listen. Before that, he was seen as a terrorist. Do you see what I'm getting at? So it's really important that someone, you know, again, it's like, you know, healthcare in America, when Obama looked at the Affordable Care Act, he managed to get some Republicans to vote for that, to pass it, right? How did he do that? You can bet he didn't just go in by himself and be like, you should listen to me. He used Republicans that these Republicans would trust to create that bridge. It's really important you think about these dynamics of human connection when you're thinking about your systems intervention. I know that's not what the whole program's about, but just bring that into your work. Cool.
Thank you.
It's all right. Anybody else?
Hiba has her hand up.
Go for it.
Fatima?
Hi, so I think you sort of answered my question just now, but my topic is on maternal morbidity and mortality in the United States. And for those who don't know, we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. And so when it comes to solutions, everyone is very excited about solutions, but nobody wants to take the leadership, and nobody is really sure of who should be responsible for implementing solutions, though they are, of course, like cross-sectoral and they need to be very collaborative. Nobody really wants to take the leadership, or they don't feel like it's their job, but everyone is supportive of solutions and thinks that this is a problem that needs to be solved. But everyone is very well-meaning, like doctors, healthcare organizations, politicians. Everyone's excited about solutions, but no one really wants to be in charge of actually carrying them out.
So through your work, what's the reasoning for that? What's the reason that there's no one wants to do it?
I think partially because our system is so fragmented. We don't have a national health system like other countries do. So it's very easy for people to pass it off and be like, well, this is not our job. It's the gynecologist's job, or it's the primary care physicians, or it's the community health workers. So there's just so many people so many stakeholders that can be passed off to.
Okay, so then how do you work on something that reprioritizes this in their head?
Can you ask that again?
So how do you look at how you can shift the prioritization of this problem in their head? You know, so at the moment, the only reason they're passing it on is because you said they believe in solving it, but they don't feel like they can do it, so they can't be bothered. So they're hoping someone else will.
Right.
Now, there are other things that they also care about, but they do put their work into because it's a priority for them. So how do you make this a priority? How do you lift it up in their list of things they have to absolutely solve? What is it that would cause that?
To be honest, I think the most compelling case would be like a return on an investment, and talk numbers and how much money they could save, because profit is so intertwined in every aspect of our health system, that anyone from the doctors to the CEOs of a health system would listen if you said that you can save this much money. But go ahead.
So I was saying that's one thing, but what can you pair that with? It needs to be a suite of things, right? For it to really work, so people collaborate. So for this to work, you just mentioned it needs a gynecologist, a primary care physician, X, Y, and Z. It requires a load of actors for this to work. And they all need to collaborate and work together for it to work. So all of them have a reason for an incentive, right? How do you map those out and say, right, we're going to create this vision that has this outcome, but these are all the actors working on it. And for this one, it's a cost-based return on investment formula or whatever.
Yeah.
For this one, it's reducing the number of deaths in the hospital. For this one, it's this. For this one, it's this. So everyone's, and I liken it to this really stupid example, but in the film Ocean's 11, Ocean wants his bandits to rob the casino, right? And they've all got their particular skill, and he brings them together. Their outcome is getting that money from the casino, but they've all got their reason for doing it.
Right.
Their own skills, their own motivations, their own egos, their own whatever. How do you pull on all that? And then when it is happening, how do you manage the kind of story there so that you can actually measure that it's happening properly, that your theory of change is actually moving in the right direction? Because this isn't going to happen overnight. You know, so for example, you know, one of the biggest issues in healthcare is not just the money side of it, but it's actually a lack of accountability. So unlike other industries, physicians, doctors, etc., no one's actually examining their mistakes well enough, so they persist. And it's something to think about of, like, you know, in most other industries, when something goes wrong, there is an evaluation and investigation or something. It doesn't really happen as much within hospitals. So, you know, how do you, you know, it's one of the things you need to look at is how do you measure this change so it's actually happening and people aren't reporting stuff in the way you want them to report it. They're actually doing it properly. But there's multiple things there, but just map out all the people that saying yes, and you're in that you know, in the kind of Nice White Parents podcast, you'll see that it's a similar thing. There are certain people that want this change to happen, but because of their lack of action, it doesn't.
Right.
So listen to that, but I want you to just map out all the people that are willing for this change to happen, but are not acting on it. What could incentivize them? And how do you tell that story better so that they can all see the progress that's happening? Because there's nothing more motivating than positive progress so that people can talk about it and feel more confident that it's worth doing so that it remains a priority and they can see an end goal. But remember, systems change is it's not a finite ending, it's a journey.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Alice, for putting up the links on the chat to
No
Nice White
worries.
Parents and the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit.
Thank you so much. So I think we're over time now, so I think we'll close. But as we said before, Darshan and myself will stay on the call for those who want to ask any additional questions. But thank you so much, Darshan, for your time tonight. Tanya, Catalina, to everyone that's attended. I really enjoyed the session and some really great thinking points that you've given us all, Darshan, and some great examples as well for us to ponder on. So hopefully you can all think about how to apply some of these questions to your own projects. And then in terms of completing a project, just make sure you continue looking at the content on Canvas, look at the evaluation criteria, and just remember that none of this is an exact science. No two projects will be the same. There's not necessarily ever a right answer. So have fun with it and explore and enjoy working together in your groups, looking at possible interventions. And it's fine to be ambitious, and your solution might be something that is going to take years to achieve, but that doesn't matter as long as you recognize that.
Yep.
Amazing.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great. So if you are leaving now, it was lovely to see you, and we'll hang on the call for a bit longer.